For 650 years, Cyprian had measured eternity by counting dust motes in a shaft of moonlight, drinking blood from crystal glasses out of obligation, not desire. He had become a king of shadows, a monster in expensive suits who had forgotten what it felt like to have a heart. But that night, the door to his private club opened without invitation, letting in the scent of rain and desperation. Standing there, in shoes stuffed with newspaper and hungry amber eyes, was not a threat to his kingdom. It was a 5-year-old girl who, unknowingly, wore his dead son's ring around her neck and carried the only question capable of making a vampire king cry. "Are you going to kill me?" The velvet curtains in the private dining room had not moved in 3 weeks. Cyprian noticed because he had been staring at them, measuring time by the accumulation of dust motes in the shaft of moonlight that cut through the gap. 650 years, and this is what eternity had distilled into, counting particles of dead skin and fiber, waiting for hunger to sharpen enough to make the act of feeding feel like something other than obligation. The crystal glass in his hand held blood the temperature of a living throat. Type AB negative, from a willing donor who'd been paid handsomely and treated to champagne in the anteroom. Ethical, civilized, utterly meaningless. He brought it to his lips without tasting. The liquid slid down his throat, and his body processed it with mechanical efficiency, cells drinking deep while his mind remained elsewhere. In another century, in a nursery where a dark-haired boy had once laughed at shadow puppets on the wall. Silas moved through the room with the whisper of old wool against older stone, clearing the untouched plate of food. The theater of humanity Cyprian maintained for reasons he could no longer articulate. The ghoul's heartbeat was steady, familiar, a clock that had been ticking in Cyprian's periphery for 40 years. "Will there be anything else, sir?" Cyprian set down the glass. "No." The word fell into silence and stayed there. The door to the establishment shouldn't have opened. This wasn't the kind of place one stumbled into. The building didn't appear on maps, and the entrance required both an invitation and a bloodline old enough to remember when Venice sank. Yet the hinges creaked, and cold air rushed in like an exhaled breath, carrying with it the scent of rain and something else. Desperation. It smelled like copper and salt, like tears dried on unwashed skin. Cyprian's head turned before he'd decided to move. The other patrons, 3 ancients in their respective alcoves, went still with predatory attention. She stood in the doorway, a small figure backlit by gaslight from the street. 5 years old, perhaps. Dark matted hair hanging in ropes around a face that would have been cherubic if not for the hollows beneath her eyes. Those eyes caught the candlelight and threw it back in shades of amber and gold. The unmistakable gleam of a fledgling vampire, newly turned and burning through whatever blood remained in her small system. She was starving. The scent of it rolled off her in waves, a hunger so profound it made the air vibrate. Cyprian felt it in his teeth, in the ancient predatory centers of his brain that recognized a dying member of his own kind. Silas materialized from the shadows, his hand already reaching for the child's shoulder. "Miss, this is a private establishment. Please." The word came out cracked, barely a whisper. She swayed on her feet, and Cyprian saw that her shoes were too large, stuffed with newspaper. "Please, I can smell it. I can smell the blood. Just a little. I'll do anything." The other vampires shifted in their seats. Leokidia Vane, seated near the far wall, set down her wine glass with a crystalline clink that sounded like a judgment being passed. "A feral," she said, her voice carrying the cultured disdain of old money and older blood. "Silas, remove it before it causes a scene." But Cyprian was already standing. He didn't remember deciding to move. His body simply rose, drawn by something he couldn't name. The child's eyes fixed on him with the desperate focus of the drowning, and he saw himself reflected there. Not as he was now, this hollow thing in expensive clothes, but as he'd been centuries ago, when hunger was still honest, still pure, still meant something. "How long?" he asked. Saskia's lips trembled. 3 weeks. "My sire, he left me. Said I was a mistake. Said the council would destroy me anyway. So why waste resources?" her small hands clenched into fists. I tried rats. I tried pigeons. But it's not enough. It's never enough. Everything's so loud and so bright, and I'm so hungry I can hear the blood in the walls, in the pipes, and I just wanted to stop. 3 weeks. A fledgling, that young, that small, she should be ash by now. That she was still standing spoke to a will that impressed and disturbed him in equal measure. Leocadia rose from her seat with liquid grace. Cyprian, surely you're not considering. She's a child. She's an illegal turning. Unsanctioned. The law is clear. The law, Cyprian said softly, was written when we still pretended to be civilized. He crossed the space between them, his footsteps soundless on Persian carpet worn thin by centuries of similar journeys. Up close, the child smelled of rain and garbage, and beneath it all, something familiar. Something that tugged at memory like a forgotten melody. Saskia looked up at him with eyes too old for her face. Are you going to kill me? No. The word surprised him. He hadn't known he was going to say it until it was already in the air between them, solid as a vow. Silas, bring a clean glass. And warm it. The ghoul hesitated only a moment before moving to obey. Leocadia's sharp intake of breath was audible across the room. You would feed her from your personal reserve? Cyprian, the council will hear of this. Then they will hear of it. He guided Saskia to his table, and she climbed into the chair with the awkward movements of exhaustion. Her hands shook as they gripped the armrests. When Silas returned with the warmed glass, Cyprian poured from his own decanter. Blood that had cost more than most mortals earned a year, treated and preserved, and utterly wasted on his numb palate. He placed it in front of her and watched as she stared at it with naked longing. Slowly, he instructed, Your system is in shock. Too fast, and you'll lose it. She nodded and lifted the glass with both hands. The first sip made her eyes close, and a sound escaped her throat. Relief and anguish mixed into something that hurt to hear. She drank in small, controlled sips, and Cyprian saw her color begin to return, the gray pallor of starvation giving way to something closer to life. As she lowered the glass, something caught the light at her throat. A thin chain, tarnished silver, and hanging from it. His breath stopped. A signet ring, small, size for a child's finger. The Vorel family crest etched into the metal, the same design that had been buried with his son 300 years ago. Saskia's eyes met his over the rim of the glass, and in them he saw the answer to a question he hadn't known to ask. My mama said, she whispered, that if I was ever in trouble, I should find the man with sad eyes who built this city shadows. She said he'd remember her. Her name was Elena. The name hit him like a stake through the sternum. Elena, his son's wife, who'd vanished after Lucian's death, pregnant and terrified of the world Cyprian inhabited. This child, this starving fledgling, his granddaughter. The glass trembled in her small hands as she set it down, the signet ring catching the firelight once more. Cyprian's fingers had gone numb, gripping the armrest of his chair with enough force that the leather groaned beneath his palm. 3 centuries, 300 years of believing his bloodline had ended with Lucian's ashes, scattered in a garden that no longer existed. Elena, he said, and the name tasted like grave dirt in his mouth. Your mother. Where's she now? Saskia's gaze dropped to the empty glass. Her thumb traced the rim in slow, deliberate circles. Gone. 2 years passed. There was a fire. Her voice remained steady, but her shoulders drew inward, making her seem even smaller in the oversized chair. She made me promise not to cry where anyone could see, said tears were dangerous for ones like us. The fire crackled, filling the silence that followed. Cyprian watched the play of orange light across the child's face. His son's cheekbones, Elena's mouth, but the eyes were pure Vorel. That particular shade of amber that turned gold when the bloodlust rose. He'd seen it in mirrors for 6.5 centuries, had watched it fade from Lucian's face as the dawn took him. How did she turn you? The question came out rougher than intended. Elena was human when she left. She wasn't. Saskia's fingers stilled on the glass. She said, Grandfather, you didn't know, that she'd been bitten weeks before the wedding, by someone who wanted to hurt your family. She hid it, learned to control it. But when I was born, the child's voice wavered for the first time. She said I came into the world already changed, that her blood had made me this way before I ever drew breath. Cyprian rose from his chair, unable to remain still. His footsteps carried him to the window, where rain had begun to streak the glass in silver ribbons. Born turned. It was rare, so rare that most of his kind considered it myth. A human woman, transformed while carrying a child, passing the curse through the womb itself. The council had laws about such things. Old laws, written in an age when mercy was considered weakness. They would kill her for existing. The ones who hurt you tonight, he said, keeping his back to her. The vampires who fed while you starved. Did they know what you were? Mama said never to tell. Saskia's reflection appeared in the window glass, small and wavering. She said there were rules about children like me, that the old ones would come if they knew. A pause, then softer. But I was so hungry, and the lady with the white hair, she smelled me. Said I was wrong, broken, that I shouldn't exist. Leocadia. Of course it would be Leocadia, the council's favorite hound, always sniffing out infractions, always eager to prove her devotion to laws that had calcified into cruelty. Cyprian had tolerated her presence in his city because the alternative was open conflict with the High Justicar, but tolerance had limits. He turned back to face Saskia. The ring. Why did Elena give it to you? The child's hand moved to her throat, fingers closing protectively around the tarnished silver. She said it was proof that if anything happened to her, I should find you, that you'd see it and remember. Her eyes met his, and in them he saw a question she was too afraid to voice. Did you love him? My papa. The words struck like a physical blow. Cyprian moved back to his chair, lowering himself into it with the careful precision of someone afraid they might shatter. More than I loved my own existence, he said, and the truth of it burned. Lucian he was everything I'd forgotten I could be. Human, in the ways that mattered. He chose mortality over immortality, chose to live one beautiful, brief life rather than endure centuries of this. He gestured vaguely at the room, at himself, at the weight of years that pressed down like stone. I respected that choice, even as it destroyed me to watch him age. Mama said he died protecting someone. Saskia's voice had gone very small, that he walked into the sunrise for a human girl who was going to be killed. He did. The memory remained sharp despite the centuries. There was a hunter, a child, really barely 16. She'd been marked for execution by a rogue coven. Lucian stood between them and her, held them off until dawn. Cyprian's jaw tightened. I arrived too late, found only ash and the girl, weeping over what remained. Saskia was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then, would you have stopped him? If you'd been there? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Cyprian considered lying, offering the comfort of a gentle untruth. But this child, his blood, his legacy, deserved better. Yes, he said, and I would have been wrong to do so. Lucian died as he lived, choosing compassion over survival. It's a lesson I've spent 3 centuries trying to understand. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the windows with increasing urgency. Cyprian felt the weight of the coming dawn in his bones, that internal clock that never failed. 3 hours, perhaps 4. Enough time to make arrangements, to secure the child before. A knock at the study door. Sharp, precise, the rhythm that meant urgency. Enter, Cyprian called. Silas stepped inside, his weathered face carefully neutral, but his pulse, Cyprian could hear it from across the room, was elevated. Forgive the intrusion, my lord, but there's been a development. Speak. Leocadia Vane has filed a formal complaint with the High Justicar's office. She's claiming you're harboring an abomination. A born-turned fledgling. Silas's gaze flickered briefly to Saskia, then back to Cyprian. She's demanding an immediate tribunal. The Justicar's enforcers are already en route. Saskia made a small sound, quickly stifled. Her hands clenched in her lap, knuckles going white. Cyprian stood slowly, his mind already racing through options, calculating angles. How long? An hour. Perhaps less if they push their speed. Silas moved closer, lowering his voice. My lord, the law is clear on this matter. Born-turned children are to be destroyed on sight. The council considers them unstable, unpredictable. If the Justicar rules against you, then the Justicar will have to go through me. The words came out flat, final. Cyprian moved to his desk, pulling open a drawer that hadn't been touched in decades. Inside, wrapped in black silk, lay his seal, the mark of his position as one of the city's founding vampires. He'd sworn an oath when he'd accepted it, had promised to uphold the council's laws without exception. He sat on the desk with a soft click. Silas, I need you to contact Marcus Thorne. Tell him I'm calling in the debt he owes me. I need a safe house, something off the council's maps, and transportation that can't be traced. My lord, Silas's voice carried a note of alarm. If you defy a direct ruling from the High Justicar, you'll be stripped of your status. Everything you've built, your position, your protection, is worthless if I can't use it to protect my own blood. Cyprian turned to face his old friend, his servant, his only remaining connection to the man he'd been before the weight of centuries had hollowed him out. I failed Lucian. I won't fail her. Silas held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. I'll make the arrangements. He moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, my lord, Lucian would be proud. The door closed softly behind him, leaving Cyprian alone with Saskia once more. The child had drawn her knees up to her chest, making herself as small as possible in the large chair. Her eyes tracked his movements with the wariness of prey. Are they going to kill me? She asked, and the steadiness of her voice, the lack of tears, the careful control, broke something in Cyprian's chest. He crossed to her, kneeling so they were eye level. This close, he could see the faint tracery of veins beneath her pale skin, could smell the blood he'd given her working through her system, beginning the slow process of healing. No, he said, and poured every ounce of certainty he possessed into the word. I won't allow it. But the rules were written by vampires who'd forgotten what it meant to value a single life over tradition. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and rested his hand on her small shoulder. You are not an abomination, Saskia. You are my granddaughter, my blood, and I will burn this entire city to ash before I let them touch you. Her eyes searched his face, looking for the lie, the crack in his conviction. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she leaned forward slightly, her forehead coming to rest against his shoulder. Not quite an embrace, but close. A gesture of trust from a child who'd learned too young that trust was dangerous. Cyprian remained very still, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever fragile thing was forming between them. He could feel her heartbeat against his chest, faster than a human's, slower than a vampire's, something caught between worlds. Like him, like Lucian had been, in his own way. My mama used to sing, Saskia whispered against his shoulder. When I was scared, old songs in a language I didn't understand. Romanian, Cyprian said softly. Elena was from the old country. Lucian loved her voice. A memory surfaced, unbidden, his son at 25, human and radiant, spinning Elena around their small garden while she laughed and sang. Before the bite, before the fear, before everything had gone so terribly wrong. Can you sing them? I don't remember the words. A lie, but a kind one. His voice had been gone for centuries, worn away by years of commands and pronouncements and careful political maneuvering. He'd forgotten how to make sounds that weren't weapons. Saskia pulled back, studying him with those two old eyes. That's sad. Yes, he agreed. It is. The rain continued its assault on the windows. Cyprian's internal clock ticked forward. 45 minutes, perhaps 50. Not enough time. Never enough time. He stood, moving back to his desk. The seal gleamed in the firelight, a small circle of silver that represented 6 centuries of careful cultivation, of building power and influence brick by brick. He'd murdered for this position, had sacrificed pieces of his humanity, so small he'd barely noticed them disappearing until he'd woken one night and realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd felt anything at all. Until tonight. Until a starving child with his son's face had stumbled into his domain and reminded him that some things were worth more than survival. "Saskia," he said, not turning around. "What I'm about to do will make me an outcast. The other vampires, the ones who follow the old laws, they'll see me as a traitor. They may hunt us both. Do you understand?" "Yes." Her voice remained steady. "Mama said you were the strongest vampire in the city, that even the council was afraid of you. Your mother was kind." Cyprian allowed himself a small, bitter smile. "The council tolerates me because I'm useful, because I maintain order and keep the humans from discovering what lives in their shadows. But defiance," he turned to face her, "that they won't forgive. Then why do it?" The question was simple. The answer was not. "Because," Cyprian said slowly, 300 years ago, I stood in a garden and watched my son burn to ash rather than compromise his principles. He chose death over dishonor. And I've spent every night since wondering if I had that same courage in me." He moved toward her, extending his hand. "Tonight I find out." Saskia looked at his offered hand for a long moment. Then she slipped her small fingers into his palm, and the contact sent a shock through him. Warmth, connection, the electric pulse of blood recognizing blood. The study door burst open. Silas stood in the doorway, his face pale. Behind him, Cyprian could hear footsteps, multiple sets, moving with the predatory grace of vampires who'd been given permission to hunt. "They're here," Silas said. The Justicar sent 6 enforcers. Leocadia's with them. His eyes met Cyprian's. "They're demanding immediate surrender of the child." Cyprian's hand tightened fractionally around Saskia's fingers. "Tell them," he said, his voice dropping into registers that made the windows rattle, "that Cyprian Vorel does not surrender what is his. My lord, they have a writ of execution, signed by the High Justicar himself." Silas's voice carried a note of desperation. "If you resist, they're authorized to use lethal force." "Then let them try." Cyprian pulled Saskia behind him, placing his body between her and the door. 6 centuries of accumulated power rose in him like a tide, filling the room with pressure that made the fire gutter and dance. "I'm the king of this city's shadows. I built the council's power structure. I taught most of these whelps how to hunt." His eyes began to glow, amber shifting to molten gold. "If they want the child, they'll have to go through me. And I promise you, Silas, not all of them will survive the attempt." Footsteps on the stairs now. Closer. The scent of old blood and older malice drifting through the doorway. Saskia's hand gripped his jacket, her small fingers digging into the fabric. "Don't die," she whispered. "Please. Everyone I love dies." The words struck him like a blade between the ribs. Cyprian looked down at her, at this child who'd been born into darkness and taught that love was a precursor to loss, and felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been sealed away for so long he'd forgotten it existed. "Then I suppose," he said softly, "I'll have to survive." The footsteps stopped just outside the study door. A voice, female, cold, dripping with sanctimonious authority, called out, "Cyprian Vorel, by order of the High Justicar and the Eternal Council, you are commanded to surrender the abomination in your custody. Resist, and you will be declared enemy of the blood. You have 30 seconds to comply." Cyprian straightened, squaring his shoulders. Behind him, Saskia trembled but didn't make a sound. Good. She was learning. Survival meant silence, meant control, meant... The door exploded inward in a shower of splinters. Leocadia Vane stood in the doorway, flanked by 6 enforcers in the council's black uniforms. Her white hair seemed to glow in the firelight, and her eyes, pale blue, almost colorless, fixed on Saskia with the focused intensity of a predator who'd found wounded prey. "There," she said, pointing. The Born turned. "Seize it." The enforcers moved forward as one. Cyprian smiled. It was not a kind expression. "No," he said simply, and the world erupted into violence. The first enforcer crossed the threshold with inhuman speed, hands reaching for Saskia. Cyprian moved faster. His palm connected with the man's sternum, and the crack echoed like a gunshot through the study. The enforcer flew backward, colliding with two others in a tangle of limbs. Behind the desk, Cyprian said to Saskia, his voice steady despite the adrenaline singing through his veins. She scrambled away without question, her small body disappearing into the shadows. Leocadia stepped over the groaning enforcer, her movements liquid and unhurried. Theatrical as always, Vorel. But you're outnumbered. 7 against 1. Even the great Cyprian Vorel cannot. He was on her before she finished, his hand closing around her throat. The remaining enforcers froze, caught between training and self-preservation. Cyprian's fingers tightened just enough to make his point. You came into my home, he said, each word precise and cold. You threatened a child under my protection. Did you truly believe there would be no consequence? Leocadia's lips curved into a smile even as her face reddened. Kill me, she whispered, and the entire council descends upon you. Is that what you want for your little pet? The truth of it burned. Cyprian released her, stepping back. Leocadia coughed, rubbing her throat, but her eyes gleamed with triumph. Surrender the abomination, she said, and you may keep your seat. Your estates, your comfortable existence. One child, Cyprian. Surely she's not worth 6 centuries of power. From behind the desk came a small sound. Not quite a sob, more like a caught breath. The sound of someone who'd heard those calculations before, who knew exactly how little she weighed on any scale. Cyprian looked at Leocadia, then at the enforcers, then at the shattered door. He thought of Lucian, of the son he'd failed to save because he'd been too afraid of breaking rules, of losing status, of risking the comfortable numbness he'd built around his grief. Silas, he called. His ghoul appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene with a single glance. Sir, prepare the carriage. We're going to the citadel. Leocadia blinked. What? You want judgment? Cyprian said. Then let's have it. I will stand before the high justicar himself. I will answer for my crimes. But Saskia comes with me, and she stands trial as a person, not a thing to be seized. The council will destroy you both. Perhaps. Cyprian moved to the desk, extending his hand. After a moment, Saskia's small fingers wrapped around his. But they'll have to look us in the eye while they do it. The citadel rose from the city's heart like a monument to eternity, all black stone and narrow windows, a place where sunlight had never touched and never would. Cyprian had walked these halls for centuries, had cast votes on matters of law and tradition, had believed in the order they represented. Now, climbing the obsidian steps with Saskia's hand in his, the building felt different. Smaller somehow, more fragile. The judgment chamber was circular, ringed with seats for the council members. At the center stood a raised dais where the accused would face their peers. Above it all, carved from a single piece of midnight marble, sat the high justicar's throne. The chamber was full. Word had spread quickly. Cyprian Vorel, the vampire king, defying the council for a born-turned child. Every seat was occupied, faces he'd known for decades or centuries watching with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. The high justicar entered last, his presence sucking warmth from the air. He was ancient beyond measure, his face a map of years that predated nations. When he sat, the room fell into absolute silence. Cyprian Vorel, the justicar's voice rolled like distant thunder. You stand accused of harboring an abomination in direct violation of the purity laws. How do you answer? Cyprian felt Saskia's hand trembling in his. He squeezed gently, then released her, stepping forward alone. I answer that your laws are cowardice dressed as tradition. The chamber erupted. Voices overlapping, some outraged, others shocked. Leocadia stood from her seat, pointing. Heresy. He admits his crime and compounds it with blasphemy. The justicar raised one hand. Silence crashed down like a physical weight. Explain yourself, Vorel. Cyprian's throat was dry, but his voice came steady. We call them abominations. Born turned, as if the method of transformation taints the soul. But what is the real crime? That a child was turned without choosing? then every fledgling in this room is guilty. None of us chose our maker's bite. Or is it that she was born from mortal parents? Then you condemn her for circumstances beyond her control, for the accident of her birth. The law exists, the Justicar said, to preserve the sanctity of our kind. The law exists, Cyprian countered, to make us feel superior, to draw a line between us and them, so we can pretend we're gods instead of parasites. Leocadia's voice cut through the murmurs. And what would you have us do? Welcome every mistake, every accident we would be overrun with children? Cyprian turned to face her. Yes, Leocadia, we might have to care for children. We might have to take responsibility for the consequences of our existence. How terrible. He turned back to the Justicar, and his voice drop became something rawer. I had a son, Lucian. He died because I followed your laws, because I was too afraid to act when action was needed. I won't make that mistake again. Saskia is under my protection. If you want her, you'll have to go through me. So be it. The Justicar's eyes were flat, emotionless. The penalty for harboring an abomination is final death. The penalty for defying this council is the same. Enforcers. Wait. The word came from the back of the chamber. An old vampire, one Cyprian barely knew, rose slowly. I would hear from the child. The Justicar frowned. She is not recognized as. She stands accused, the old vampire interrupted. Even monsters deserve to face their accusers. Or have we abandoned that tradition as well? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The Justicar's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Very well. Bring the abomination forward. Cyprian looked back at Saskia. She stood frozen at the chamber's edge, so small against the massive doors. Her eyes were huge, terrified, but when he extended his hand, she moved. One step, then another, until she stood beside him at the center of the circle. State your name, the Justicar commanded. Saskia. Her voice was barely a whisper. You are accused of existing in violation of natural law. What defense do you offer? Saskia looked up at Cyprian, then back at the throne. I didn't ask to be born, she said. I didn't ask to be turned. I just am. And I'm hungry all the time, and I'm scared, and everyone says I shouldn't exist, but I do. And Cyprian, her voice cracked. Cyprian says I matter, that I'm not a mistake. The chamber was utterly still. He's the first person who ever said that, Saskia continued. The first person who didn't look at me like I was wrong. So if you're going to kill him for helping me, then you should kill me too, because I don't want to be alone again. A tear slid down her cheek. Just one, catching the torchlight. Cyprian moved without thinking. He knelt, ignoring the council, ignoring the Justicar, ignoring 6 centuries of protocol. He knelt until he was at Saskia's level, and with infinite gentleness, he wiped the tear away with his thumb. You're not alone, he said softly. Whatever happens, you're not alone. Behind him, someone gasped. Then another. The sound spread like ripples in still water. Not outrage, but something else. Recognition, perhaps. Or memory. The Justicar leaned forward, studying them. When he spoke, his voice had lost some of its granite edge. Cyprian Vorel, you claim this child as your responsibility. I claim her as my daughter. More gasps. Leocadia shot to her feet. Impossible. The law forbids. The law, the Justicar said quietly, is what we make it. He was silent for a long moment, his ancient eyes moving between Cyprian and Saskia. I remember when we were hunted, when we hid in shadows and feared the dawn. We created laws to survive, to build something lasting. But perhaps, he trailed off, then straightened. The council will vote, all in favor of upholding the purity laws and executing both accused signify. Hands rose. Leocadia's first, then others. Cyprian counted them, his heart a cold stone. All opposed. More hands. The old vampire who'd spoken earlier. Others Cyprian had thought lost to tradition. The count was close, agonizingly close. The Justicar's hand remained down. Then, slowly he raised it. Opposed, he said. By one vote, the accused are spared. However, his gaze fixed on Cyprian. You will be responsible for her. Her actions, her control, her survival. If she falls, you fall with her. Do you accept these terms? Cyprian's hand found Saskia's. I do. Then this council is adjourned. They left the citadel as dawn threatened the horizon. Silas waited with the carriage, his weathered face carefully neutral. Cyprian lifted Saskia inside, then paused, looking back at the black stone edifice. You could have died, Saskia said from the carriage. For me. Cyprian climbed in beside her, pulling the curtain closed against the coming light. Yes. Why? He thought of Lucian, of all the ways he'd failed, of 6 centuries spent believing that survival meant isolation. He thought of Saskia's hand in his, of her voice saying everyone I love dies, of the weight of being someone's reason to hope. Because, he said finally, you reminded me what it means to be alive. Outside, the city stirred. Inside the carriage, in the darkness they both required, Saskia leaned against his shoulder. Her breathing slowed, steadied. After a moment, Cyprian felt her small hand slip into his again. He didn't let go. The carriage rolled through empty streets toward home, carrying a vampire who'd remember how to care and a child who'd learned she was worth caring for. Behind them, the citadel's shadow stretched long and dark. Ahead, the sun prepared to rise. But in the space between night and dawn, in that fragile moment of possibility, 2 hearts that no longer beat found their rhythm together. And that, Cyprian thought, was enough.